congratulations yet. That's going to happen in about 45 minutes, but I know the work is done, and this is basically a celebration of that work. So there aren't many rules here. One of the rules, though, is if you keep your microphone off, unless you're having conversation at the end, that helps keep out extraneous noise. You can keep your camera on if you want. But Xavier has told me that he would like to record this session, so everybody should know that if they have their camera on, they are being recorded, and they're free to have their cameras off. But if you want to have your camera on to give Xavier faces to talk to, you should do that. It's up to you. So what we usually do in these presentations is we just give the student 45 minutes to use as they will. It's almost always a mix of presentation on the student's part, followed by conversation on all of our part. So with that, I welcome everybody here. I'm so glad to see so many people here supporting Xavier Hickey. And I'm going to turn it over now to Brian Bowe. Oh, I would like to say one other thing, so it's hopefully not lost on anybody that today is the 1-year anniversary that the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. And this last year has turned so many lives upside down. Many of us have lost loved ones, have lost jobs, have lost opportunities, have lost friendships because of isolation. But through all of this, there's been a perseverance. And I think what we're seeing this morning is an example of that resiliency and perseverance. And so I'm so glad to see so many people here supporting Xavier. So again, over to Brian Bowe.
Thank you, Scott. And I want to build on what you just said within the context of talking about Xavier, because I first got to know Xavier when he was in my honors seminar that focused on arts and culture reporting. And it was a great quarter, but it was also a very weird quarter because we had this very robust and fun class, or I had this very robust and fun class planned that really hinged on lots of arts and cultural events happening in real time. And of course, we had to regroup and figure out what we were going to do after that. I was really impressed with the thoughtfulness of Xavier's work and the way he really engaged with very important questions about how arts and culture help shape us as individuals and our society. So I was really happy when he asked me to be the advisor for his honors project. And we've spent these months as he's been working on it, really digging into issues of identity and how that informs the work we create, and also notions of the canon and whose voices are included and whose voices aren't. So it's been just such a very fun project, and it's been very rewarding for me to see it as it has developed. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing this final product. And by the way, I will just close by offering my apologies to everyone for you being up so early, because I am coming to you from Egypt, where it is 6 p.m. And so I'm happy that everybody was able to accommodate me not having to do this at 3 in the morning. So thank you. And so take it away, Xavier. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
All right. Thank you both so much. My gosh, where do I start? Probably with sharing my screen, right? I have been working on this wonderful wonderful thing to share with you all. Can you see that? What does it look like? Is it good? Okay, because I haven't used this website for, these like slideshows kind of things yet, so I'm not sure how it looks for you. Do you see like the side part where it says speaker view or speaker notes?
Yeah, we see the speaker notes
You do
part
see
right
the
now.
speaker notes? Okay. How about now?
I still see the speaker notes.
You still do? Okay. Well,
And I don't care.
you know what? If you don't care, that's fine. We'll just work with it. You can see all my little notes on the side. It'll be a nice little Easter egg. You get to see inside my brain a little bit. But yeah, thank you so much for showing up to this. As everyone has kind of said, my name is Xavier Hickey. I'm an honor student here. I've been studying creative writing for 3 years at Western now, I think. Much too short of time, honestly. Wish I could stay here just forever, really. But yeah, let's get into it. This is reconstructing, recontextualizing literature. Um, First, I wanted to real quick start off with tribal lands acknowledgement. I think it's important, especially considering the content of what this is, to recognize the ancestral homelands, the Coast Salish people, and how much time that we really do spend on this land, and how important it is to kind of respect that history and the, gratitude that we should have towards those tribes for, doing everything they can to kind of protect and care for the lands in the way they do. Continuing on, the project begins. So really when this project started, and I'll just kind of like start off with just kind of giving a big rundown of the history of where this has been going. I just wanted to make a podcast. I was like, I love podcasts. I just want to make a podcast. I don't know what it's going to be about, but it's going to be about something. And then I had this amazing class with Professor Bowe, Brian, where we just talked about so much involving culture in a way that I hadn't really necessarily done before. And it really inspired me to like think about that more, think about the media that was like I was consuming and that other people were consuming. Um, and that inevitably led to kind of asking a lot of questions about, you know, the media that we consume. I got really hung up on this idea of like high art, low art, because that was something that came up a lot in the class specifically that I had with Professor Bowie. But as it kind of turned out, not a lot of other people were really into it. And I don't know if necessarily that was just like a bad way of phrasing the question, but I just kind of like inevitably got away from that idea of high art and low art. It was just really tough to like meet a lot of people on that subject. Most people were just kind of like, what is high art? What is low art? Like, why does that matter? And then it kind of just like took it away from me of being like, I mean, I didn't really care about it either, and ultimately, and so um, it was definitely a rocky start for this like project because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to make a podcast. But luckily, it took a really good turn when um, somehow during all of this, my like love for Indigenous literature really like sparked up again from one of my classes that I was taking at the time. And so even though I was like slowly losing interest in the one thing that I kind of had grounding me for the project, I was like very quickly finding something to shift into with the Indigenous literature. Um, so the real real start to the project is kind of when Brian and I both kind of sat down and I was like, yeah, this direction that I'm going with things right now isn't working. Um, I know that I want to make a podcast, but I don't know what I want to make it about. And I think maybe like I need to readjust things. And inevitably, we kind of sat down again and had this kind of epiphany of like, what if we look at literary canon, look at the classics, look at, as Brian kind of said when, introducing, look at what kind of voices are excluded. Um, and it really that this is what really started getting like my juices just going. uh this is when it kind of turned from like this is just a project that I'm doing for school because like I have to this is something I'm really passionate about. um yeah. And so this is like really where things started to take an interesting turn. um I immediately took this idea of the literary canon and asking like what underrepresented, marginalized voices aren't shown within the classics. What could we possibly do to replace or like add in their voices? And I took that and I was like, all right, I know people who know a lot about Indigenous like literature. Let me go and talk to them and see what they think about this question. Try to like get like a field gauge about what what the general consensus is from the professors. And it was immediately kind of smacked away from it a little bit in a very interesting way because like met with a literature professor and was just again super excited and just I learned so much about how vibrant and active the community is around Indigenous authors right now and Indigenous storytellers, but was also kind of met with this warning of like they don't want to talk about the literary canon anymore. They've been done with it for a long time, which really piqued my interest, but also kind of like scared me away from the topic because I had just gone through this transition of going like from one question to another. Um, and this was like over several months of like figuring out and formulating these questions and figuring out how that's going to turn into a podcast and then kind of like shifting into a different thing. So it was really it was a tough like roadblock to come to kind of realize like um this is something that I might not be able to just directly ask. And how should I approach that then? Which then came up with a lot of other like fears that I'd already kind of had in the back of my mind about approaching this kind of community, because I know just how difficult it can be and how sensitive it can be, especially when I'm putting out my voice and my opinions and my name attached to something that could potentially be harmful or potentially have a message that is any number of things that aren't helpful ultimately in the end. Um, and so I got really scared away from doing much with this. Um, with that said, I still, I still had a project to do. I still had to move forward. So even though I had lost momentum, I was still trying to figure out how to move forward from this. So I went back to the lab again, as Eminem once said. Um, although I was struggling with it, I was trying to find ways to use the resources that I had been given to figure out what to do next. Um, ultimately, this is also one of my biggest failings with this project is I didn't reach out to Brian enough during it, but I do think that having taken the time to just really sit with what was going on and the questions that were like just eating away really ended up coming back to, I don't know, reward me a little bit in terms of where the project's going now. Um, there's also a really like serendipitous moment within this where all of my classes lined up like to just kind of help push this project forward. So during this most recent quarter, I started learning a lot about modernism and postmodernism movements in ways that I hadn't before. And because of that, I kind of was able to get a research breakthrough. Um, ultimately, like a lot of the problems that I was having approaching this topic and approaching this subject is that I loved culture and I loved talking about all of this, but I didn't have the background knowledge or the verbiage, the just the language to really actually have a dialogue about it. Um, and so when studying postmodernism, it gave me a better perspective on the questions I was asking and how to tackle those questions and how to move forward with this project. And so that giant roadblock that was such a big deal of kind of going like this question that's burning that I need to have an answer to, it's been answered. And I now have a new opportunity instead with this podcast to move forward and do something different with it now. Um, Thanks to like a philosopher, Cornel West, he had a lot of work involved with minority groups and with marginalized voices, in terms of how postmodernism is so based in kind of decentralizing power and decentralizing political like control in a lot of ways. Um, and so when looking at, these identities of Indigenous authors who are so clearly like they've been through some rough times and they're still going through rough times, um, it really shed a lot of light on why it was so it was so easy and quick for them to be able to. I shouldn't say it was easy and quick because I don't really know, and that's part of what I want to talk to them with the podcast eventually. But how they were able to move so quickly to moving past the canon, because it's still like even now something that I'm like, it sounds strange to just be able to abandon that so quickly, but at the same time, having read the works and looking through them, it makes sense. It makes so much sense how their unique styles and the way that they vividly tell stories in the books and the poetry and everything that they're putting out there, these Indigenous authors and storytellers, it's so tied in intrinsically with the culture that they have. And that's because they're not basing their storytelling necessarily on the same extremely centered, somewhat Eurocentric idea of literature. Um, I will say at this point right now, I hope everyone's following. And if you're not, I'm sorry. I will keep trying to do my best to like make this make sense. But I will say that, yeah, like it just started all clicking. It all started coming together. It made sense why these stories were so important to me is because they do such a good job of not just presenting a character that has a particular culture or just kind of going like, oh, I lived through these things, and so this is like I can give a, accurate uh way of saying like this is what happened. But the stories themselves were formed and written in styles and mediums that empowered that. And that's why they were so like effective to me. When I first got here to Western, one of my first classes was an Indigenous literature class, and it immediately just kind of shifted what I was expecting from coming to college. Because again, when I came here, I really was expecting to come and read a bunch of Shakespeare and a bunch of Tolstoy and these other authors that are obviously still important, but not in the same way that it was to see how identity can play such a big role in the way a story is written and presented. Um, so after all of that, I was finally able to kind of sit down and come up with a new strategy for what I wanted to do with the podcast. It had been such a long process of going back and forth about what I wanted to even do with it and how I wanted to do it. Um, at a lot of points, I was so kind of racked with like fear and anxiety and worry about a lot of the parts about how this would be presented that it really it froze me. And this was not my best year at all. But with that said, I've been able to gain so much from that and find the points that I'm weak in my like work ethic and in how I approach problem solving and grow from it. So ultimately, I didn't have to dwell on that question anymore, and I didn't have to hold back on the project anymore. And I was able to start moving forward and start figuring out how I wanted to talk to these authors and these storytellers and how I wanted to start presenting this project and realistically actually make a podcast. Um, and so that was it. I had this breakthrough. It's been several months since starting this, and within all that time, reading so many works by so many authors, so many poems, looking at so much art, listening to so much music, and all the while trying to get a sense of how culture and identity kind of intermesh and like why that is and how that is. It, yeah, it's been just so interesting. And even though I know this podcast will not be done by the time I'm graduating, it's almost been very nice to recognize that there's something after this. It, this whole time at college has really given me a lot of room to recognize like what I want to do afterwards. Because I kind of just came into college going, I want to have a college experience. You know, I want to learn how to write stories better, and that's it. But this has really given me a lot more to kind of actually care about. um, One of the earlier versions of all of these slides had a slide that was talking more about how I didn't have a lot of care in activism or, you know, socioeconomic problems. I myself have a mixed race of all sorts, but I've never dealt with any problems myself in a way that made me recognize the struggles of marginalized people. And coming to college and reading these stories and seeing other people how much they care has changed that. And so this podcast now isn't just a project that I'm doing for school. It's not just a project that I'm doing for honors. It's a project that I really just want to do for me. And I want to do for everyone else. I want to be able to get the voices of these, you know, Indigenous authors and have a conversation with them about identity and about writing and really get to the bottom of, again, a lot of these questions that like I think right now I kind of have a grasp on, but I think it'll be really interesting once I do get into a call with them. Hopefully a Zoom call, but maybe even in person with some of them in the near future. And I can start to like deconstruct some of these ideas that have been built up from times before I was at college and times during college. So, yeah, in the end, that brings us here right now to the present day. Um, my plan for the podcast is very well set out. I want to make 3 distinct episodes which highlight the prose authors, you know, the novelists, the poets, and a third category of storytellers who don't fit into that. So much of the idea of recontextualizing literature is broadening what it means for literature to tell a story. And yeah, I think that if all goes well, those 3 episodes will have an intro and then an outro episode, and it'll be like 5 episode series, and it'll be great. And I'll put it out there one day and I'll let everyone here know, and I'll be like, hey, remember that time that I was doing this presentation and I catfished everyone into coming at 8 a.m. in the morning to listen to me talk about how I didn't have a podcast to show everyone? Um, but I also want to say that's not all. And I hopefully, yeah, doing perfect on time. I can't possibly go through all of this explanation about myself and about the journey that I've had centered around these amazing and inspiring writers without actually showing some of the authors and storytellers that have made such an impact in my career here at Western and just my future going forward. Um, First off, I wanted to show off and kind of, you know, give a little promo for Eden Robinson, one of the most amazing Canadian authors I've ever read. She has this really interesting genre that she works in of indigigoth, it's just indigenous goth, but it does such a good job of aligning the storytelling world into a place that's very gritty and real and understandable, but also having the mysticism and having the kind of like mystery that's involved with a lot of the indigenous stories that are told. She's a member of the Haida and the Hiltsuk First Nations, and she even one of her books, the one that I read for a class, got turned into a film that was released earlier this year. So I'm actually probably going to watch that this weekend. I did not realize it was out yet. Only found that out while doing some research for this. Another amazing author that came up and read the book for, Tommy Orange. Um, he didn't win the Pulitzer, but he was a finalist for it in 2019. He did win an American Book Award. And a lot of the flair around this author has been um, his identity as an urban Indian. And the way that that's presented in the books is, again, so clearly written in a way to empower that identity and empower that storytelling. Um, and it's something that like I don't think anyone else could do. Nobody else can necessarily tell that story in that way. And again, that's what the whole idea of recontextualizing literature is about, is recognizing that literature, the form can change to empower the writing. Layli Long Soldier, an amazing poet, uh, super activist. I believe she was once quoted saying like she just doesn't write poetry that's not attacking something, which I think is amazing. I almost put on here that she's just like a warrior. And yeah, she's very well known for her poetry book, Whereas, it's a collection. And it just does such an amazing job of using the visuals of the words on the page to say a lot. And again, it's just, I'm going to keep harping on it, but like the form of literature is really being played with here to express the identity that these people find a connection with. My personal favorite, Tommy Pico. Um, he is an Indigenous poet, a podcaster, and a TV show writer. Might be obvious for some of you why I think he's my favorite. He's hilarious. He has this manic style of writing, and it's so clearly like reading his works, you can tell it's him. And there's something that's so interesting about that because oftentimes you'll read other people's works and it might have kind of their voice, but not in the same way of how genuine it comes across with Tommy Pico's writing. Um, Absolutely think that everyone should just go take a look at some of his poetry somewhere on the internet. Whether you love it or hate it, I think it's funny and I think it's amazing. And then last but not least is Black Belt Eagle Scout, which is one of the people who you know, I want to include as a storyteller, as an Indigenous storyteller that doesn't fit into these writing categories. She's a musician and a singer. She's carrying on this big tradition, part of this project that I did for research that Brian suggested was watching this documentary about how these indigenous people, these Indians and First Nations people, they really inspired a lot of rock and roll, and it was really enlightening to see that history. And so it's so interesting to see Black Belt Eagle Scout, who's, I'm sure, like slowly gaining a lot of critical acclaim. I know she was like one of NPR's favorites from last year or something, just carrying on this mantle of like Indigenous music artists really pushing forefronts of music, because again, they're recontextualizing it, and they're not looking at the bounds that are put there by these very centralized ideas from modernism and from the way that culture has kind of slowly pushed towards the center. Yeah, definitely highly, you know should check all of them out in some way or another. But yeah, overall, that's a wrap. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming here. I've had the like pictures tucked away in the corner, so I don't know if I could have seen any of you. Um, but again, I want to thank you all for your support today. Um, Thank you all so much. And if you have any questions or comments, now is the time.
All right, well, now is the time that we show some appreciation with our hands. So you can use your electronic hands under reactions like that, or you can show your hands on your camera. Um, and then we'll turn this into conversation. Xavier has certainly given us a lot to talk about and think about. I've got a page full of notes. But I'd like to turn this over to the audience first, because there's all these people who got up so early to come and do this. So we will hear, I'm sure, from Brian. We'll hear from as many of you as possible. So Xavier, if you want to unshare, would you like to unshare your screen so that we can
Oh,
get
yes,
more people on the gallery here?
that would be fantastic.
Um,
I need to remember how to.
uh, it's up at the top. Should be a button that just says unshare. Um,
Stop sharing. They always make it so small, and I forget it's small. Okay.
Excellent, excellent. So what with this many people, it might be best if folks use the hand raise function if they want to have their turn. That puts people in an order, and then we can just go from there. But lots of time. We have plenty of time to interact with Xavier here. So who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go ahead and start off since I've watched this this develop after all this time. So great work, Xavier. So there were a few motivations that you talked about in your presentation today, but that things that were driving this project. And one of them had to, I think there was one thread that had to do, with some sort of questions related to your own identity and how you relate to the world and to literature. And then there was this other motivation that really was looking to these authors in some way to develop your own craft as a writer. And then there was this other motivation of learning how to develop and produce a podcast. And I'm just wondering, and you may have had other motivations too that I'm not remembering, but here at this point of where you are, do you think that this project has had benefits for one of those threads in particular? Like which benefit have you gotten the most out of this?
Yeah, I mean, love that. I Yeah, you're spot on with all three of those. If there's another motivation other than just pure um pure just love for all of it, I don't I can't think of it. But yeah, really, I feel like it benefited all three. obviously the podcast part is a little bit less so, other than the fact that I've now realized how difficult it is to make a podcast in reality, unless I'm going to just sit here and talk about, you know, whatever random thing comes up. But yeah, it's definitely done a lot as far as, you know, understanding my own personal identity. And I should break that down a little bit and say, like, again, I'm very mixed race, and going into, you know, these stories where they're so very clearly like, I'm Indigenous and I know what that means and I know how to tell that story, it's always been really weird for me because my story is just about not having that. It's about not really having like a clear, like, this is the group that I'm a part of. I'm just a part of all of them. And I love that so much, but it also has always been a very weird place to be, like, with an identity. Um, and so, like, reading these stories and getting this context for how, you know, all of it, all of the, like, ideas around what a centered identity even is, isn't real. Tommy Orange, again, like, one of the big things with that author is that he's writing from a perspective that is very different from a lot of the other Indigenous authors. And so when he was kind of coming out and going like, yeah, I'm going to write from this urban Indian perspective, everyone was like, well, that's, what is that? Like, we don't even know what that is. We know about, like, res Indians, you know, there's so many stories about reservation life in, you know, um, Indigenous people. And so I think it's just really interesting to see how that plays into it. And then how that plays into my own craft is, how can I use this idea of recontextualizing literature to empower my own writing? How does my identity form what literature is for me? And so I think just like asking questions like that has been just really, really helpful to understand all that for myself. Yeah. I hope
So
that answered well. Yeah, go ahead.
oh, Julie Duggar has a hand up. Thank you. Thank you, Xavier.
Hi. I just thank you for this. And I'm teaching in the honors program this term. And so the list of topics went around, and I just came because I was really interested in your topic. I wanted to ask you, I got an email yesterday that Humanities Washington is starting this initiative. They're doing an online magazine called Rights of Green that's about Washington State folk life. And I was curious, in light of the thinking that you've been doing about canons and not using canons, what you think, whether you have any thoughts on this idea or this initiative to center a canon around a place, in this case, Washington State. So it looked to me like they're trying to sort of redefine how they're looking at culture by talking about, they said Washington State folk life. So any thoughts on a program like that?
Yeah. I first of all, I don't really know, like, what that is or what that kind of means, but from what I'm trying to gather with it, I think that's amazing, honestly. Like, I don't want to give off the impression that, like, we shouldn't have a canon. We should have no baselines, like, because that's not real. I want to be able to look at somebody's, you know, work and kind of say, like, this did inspire me in a way. Um, I just think that, like, the literary canon, what I'm more trying to get at is that it should be redefined for the context that you yourself as a writer or as a storyteller are a part of. There shouldn't be just one clearly delineated, like, this is the only way to have it. It should be a constantly shifting form. And so I think, like, if they're trying to kind of, like, you know, reestablish what the canon is for themselves by placing it in a very specific place, that can be really powerful as far as, like, the stories that come out of that for them, because it does shift the context of what all of the canon means for them. I hope that makes sense. I'm not super well versed in, say, like, trying to explain these ideas still. It's still a little new for me too, but thank you for that question.
Seems like you're getting closer. You're getting closer to figuring out how you want to do this. And I don't know, I'm looking for other hands up. As soon as I see one up, we will turn to that person. Okay, Athlan, do you want to unmute? And
Good morning. I'll make it easy because there's some tough questions, and there's some words, Xavier, I had to look up that you shared. So apparently I needed to spend more time at the university paying attention. But two simple questions. Do you have a podcast title, and when do you think it's going to start up? Because I'd like to listen, and I'm sure some of your other family on this call would like to as well. But good job.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you came. First of all, I want to say that. I mean, everyone, but yeah. As far as the name, it's still tentatively the recontextualizing. I might have to change it because I can't even say that word myself. But like recontextualizing literature. If it could be something a little bit more snappy and fun, that would probably be great. That was just kind of really what like it's about in the end, is just recontextualizing what literature is. But yeah, as far as updates and when it'll be out, it's a little tough to say because I still have to try to reach out to a lot of the authors and see like if I can. Again, like the musician is kind of a big deal, so like being able to talk to them would be really cool, but also like I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little tough to actually like get access to them for a little while. But I am hoping to, again, with this being such a big deal and a big project for me, I want to try to maybe like make a website or like, you know, Twitter or something that I can kind of like keep people updated on it more, as this kind of keeps coming along. And yeah, as Scott kind of said, I'm learning along with everyone else on this, and this has been my own journey of learning, as well as like I'm now taking you all into it too. Um, so I can't really say anything for like a solid amount right now, but I will absolutely be letting everyone know as soon as I know.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
so it occurs to me that podcasts have had a huge impact on the last, especially 5 years. I mean, I'm sure there's some before that, but the last 5 years has been a big impact. And, you know, I'll ask students, I used to ask students, what are you reading these days? And now the first question I ask is, what podcasts are you listening to these days? Because I think that's where there's a whole lot of learning and thinking going on. And so I think you've definitely found a medium that will connect with your generation for sure, but hopefully beyond that. And you've got such a fantastic voice. I mean, there's the metaphorical voice, but then there is the voice. And Xavier, your voice is good for radio. I mean, my face is good for radio, but your voice is good for radio. But what podcasts have done is allowed a lot of academics, you know, people who maybe would have just written a few articles or a book that might have been read by a few people in some library far away, to now have an audience that's much broader. But it requires that they translate that to a broader audience, right? And I think that's what you've been trying to do here. And that's kind of goes to Athlan's question here about, you know, how do you translate this very academic sort of thinking in that you've been discovering through your classes to a broader audience? And I think that might be one of the things that, you know, causes everybody to struggle. I mean, it certainly, you know, there's a very popular podcasts like Freakonomics and things like that have taken very, very complicated, usually pretty academic, specialized language and turn them around to be accessible to a broader audience. And I think that's what you're on the verge of doing here. And so I just had a question about whether you, I mean, I would imagine you would hope to be able to interview some of these authors for your podcast, but would you be satisfied with just being able to read their work and talk about their work, and maybe talk about their work with, you know, some other people who think about their work or enjoy their work? Because sometimes it's kind of hard to get the actual artist, especially when you're new and you don't have a name to appear. So What are you thinking that way as far as who will the voices be? Because you said you don't want it to just be you. So who will the voices be in the podcast?
That's honestly such a fantastic question. I wish I had just come to you a little bit earlier and been like, hey, what kind of ideas do you have for this? Because that that would have been a really great idea to just be like, yeah, I'll just read the books and talk to some people about it. Um, I ultimately do really hope that I can, because again, like so much of this, I do want to kind of pick their brains. I really do want to see like how much of this am I just kind of guessing at and seeing from, all of these examples in history. And I do really also want to be able to celebrate and share their voices. You can tell I talk and talk. I'm such a long-winded person. My parents will also agree. Like I am such a talker, and so I don't want it to just be me like sitting there in the mic and just going like, "Hey, good morning, Vietnam." Like it's not who I want to be for this. I want to, because these are such marginalized voices, I want it to have some of their voice. But with that said, I know that there's a lot of people I've talked to, and actually somebody that I'll be talking to later today, one of the staff here at Western, Teresa Warburton, who have worked really closely with these communities and have a lot of knowledge with it. And so it is the kind of thing where like if I can sit down and have a good conversation about that with them, and then put that into a podcast that then inspires people to go read the works anyways, like I'll feel like my job has been done. That's the main thing, is I just really, again, have so much love and respect for what these authors have done with their writing and what they've been doing with their storytelling craft, that I really want that to be more recognized. So yeah, no, I absolutely agree that I think that's a really good idea. And it is definitely like something that'll be a part of it either way, I think.
Okay, we have time for more questions. If anybody would like to unmute and jump in or raise the hand, and okay, looks like Greg Woodward. You can unmute and
Yeah, go for it.
There we are, unmuted. Xavier, I got one of the questions I have is because you're uniquely, you're uniquely qualified to cover this genre, in that you're genetically tied to 4 continents. And the concentration of this particular piece is Indigenous people. But do you see yourself taking advantage of the mix of genetics in you to cover Indigenous people, not only on this continent, but in Asia, in Europe? There's so many different angles you can do that you simply can't do in a 45-minute presentation. Do you see yourself branching into that and even touching on those topics?
Yeah, okay, hold on. First of all, just want to say and tell everyone this is my amazing grandfather, who I have to like give so much love and respect to for how much he has inspired me to go down this path of writing. So I just want to say that because I really do mean it, and I'm so glad that he could be here today for this. Um, and then I do want to say like, yeah, no, I can, Brian can vouch for this. I at one point was like, I want this to be like a whole BIPOC thing. Like I want this to have just everyone's voice in it because I think that's important. But he kind of talked me down off the ledge of that and was like, if you do that, like you're gonna have too much to cover. You're not gonna be able to do it. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like I can't really, because there's so much to do with that. But I do think if this is something that like ends up working for me, and or even if it doesn't, I'm just like, you know what, I don't care if no one's listening to it. I'm gonna keep doing it anyways. There's so many, like you said, there's so many other cultures and people out there that do have these voices and do have these stories that are being told in such amazing ways and aren't really being appreciated. One of the first like Indigenous literature classes I was taking was actually about like Hawaiian Indigenous people, and the stories that they're telling over there, and that stuff coming out of that is so amazing and so wonderful. And so I do think it's like it would be cool to touch on that kind of thing, and it would be cool to touch on Asia. I don't know stories from Asia at all. That would be super cool to like see how that compares, see how their context and their canon is different already, and see what they're doing with that nowadays, if they're changing form, if they're entrenching deeper into it. I could absolutely see this going like just absolutely off the rails and all over the place. But I do also want to say, like, on one hand, there is a nice part of it, me being so mixed race, to kind of have a connection to all of them. I have the Choctaw Indian to kind of have a connection with this part of, the indigenous part. Um, and I have Korean to be able to go and say, like, yes, there's this, I can connect to that. But at the same time, I don't want it to be like I have this voice that I can use to say things. I want it to just be more like anybody could do this. Like anybody could go like, hey, I'm really interested in this culture that you're saying and you're showing. Can I like spread that? Can I share that with the world? I want to like, kind of be a supportive help. I don't know that my brain is now starting to like jello. So yes. Ashley?
Hi, Xavier. Thank you so much for this. And I want to say I don't have a question, but it was said that this is a time also for congratulations. So I'm going to take advantage of that. And I work with Xavier, so I think I've had a really unique perspective on kind of the journey of this project. And it's been a real like delight and to watch it evolve over time and the little catch-ups we would get every weekend. I think I just want to say a couple of things. One is that you mentioned earlier that like this process showed you what you felt were some of the weaknesses in your work ethic or in your strategies. But what I really see in this is your resilience and your ability to adapt to changing new information and changing questions. And I hope that you also really feel that as well, because when you had that first moment of like, oh, this is not the question, I think a lot of people either just keep going or they just stop. And I think it's really incredible that you just were like, there's something here that really calls to me, and I'm going to find a way to find the words that are right for it. So I think that's really amazing. And I've just so enjoyed listening to and hearing more about your process and your project. And I can't wait for your podcast to come out. And I will say, as a person who, as you say, is quite mixed race, your perspective and your approach to this story is really powerful and really special and important. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks and get to tell everybody that that you're an incredible human, not only to learn with, I'm sure, but also to work with. And I'm so looking forward to hearing where this project goes.
Thank you, Ashley. That was so wonderfully said. And I think what I want to do now is thank everybody for coming and supporting Xavier here today. I want to especially thank Dr. Brian Bowe for joining us from the other side of the world and supporting Xavier through this. I think, the voice that I'm hearing that you are expressing so well, and I heard it in Ashley's point as well, is the voice of multi-identity. Because there's a lot of really important conversations going on right now about identity, and those are extending, beyond the United States. They're all over the place. But you don't often hear the voice of multi-identity as part of that. And I think you've really hit on something here. And so I think everybody here is excited and encouraging, and we're like, go Xavier, go. We want to hear this podcast because we think it's worthwhile, and we think that your perspective is an important one, and your heart is in the right place. And those are the things that really put together a great piece of work. So if everybody else can join me in showing your hands and congratulating Xavier here again. I just need to let you know about a couple of things. One is there's going to be a package coming your way. So if Kate Stevenson sends you an email, you should make sure that you let her know what your home address is if you're here in Bellingham, or your mailing address. She'll also give you some information about turning in final work. And one of the things that you're going to be getting as part of this is the honors program coffee mug, because, well, you can put whatever you want in there, but only students who complete the honors program get this mug with our seal on it. And, every podcaster that I've ever seen always has a mug nearby. So you're going to need that. The other thing that I like to point out, there we go, is these are the cords of the graduation cords, the commencement regalia for the honors program. And I know they're a little bit hard to see here, but they're these white cords, and you've earned these. And I don't know what your graduation plans are. I think there'll be a ceremony of some sort in June, but you've earned these, and you should wear them around for a few days, because you did the work that got you here. But I hope that you've grown through this whole process. Obviously, to me, you have. And then the last thing is that your really nice poster that you did to advertise this will be included in next year's catalog of Honor Senior Project posters, which reminds me to finish by saying this is the first of a whole suite of really, really fantastic presentations that are going on throughout today, tomorrow, and on Monday. And so the next one up is at 10 o'clock. It's actually at this same address, that you can just come back to this same Zoom address. And that'll be Leah Curbs, who's going to be talking about some paintings and some interviews that she did with students in the honors program. Because she's just a fantastic artist, but also really, well, all of these students are fantastic. And if you come to a few of these, you'll see. So they'll be going on
Absolutely.
throughout today, tomorrow, and Monday. So any last words here? We've got some hearts going up here to congratulate Xavier. And with that, we made it all the way to 9 o'clock here. I think I'll let everybody know that the next one's at 10. We're back at the same address. Xavier, thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
That was wonderful.
Yes.
And take care, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.
Yes.
Congratulations.
And yes, everyone should go check out the other ones. They're my friends, they're my classmates, they're beautiful, they're amazing people. They have so many more amazing things to say. So yeah, do check it out. And thank you all so much.
Okay, well, with that, we'll end this meeting, and I'll see some of you at 10 o'clock. So take care, everybody. Be well.